Have you ever been confronted by someone so entitled, so overbearing, that you couldn't believe they were serious? That's exactly what happened to me the day Karen from the HOA marched up to my doorstep and demanded money that wasn't even hers to begin with. What she didn't know was that I wasn't the type to back down, and the way I turned the tables left her stunned. It all started on an ordinary Saturday morning. I was sitting on my porch, coffee in hand, enjoying the quiet of my neighborhood. My home isn't part of any HOA. That was one of the biggest reasons I bought it. No surprise rules, no random fines, no one policing how I mow my lawn. Just peace and freedom. But peace doesn't last long when you live down the street from someone like Karen. She was the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, parading around with her HOA clipboard like it was a badge of authority. Even though her HOA technically stopped 2 blocks away, she liked to act as though her reach extended to every house within her line of sight. That morning, she spotted me and came strutting up my driveway with that familiar glare, like she was already rehearsing a speech. She didn't even bother with a hello. "You haven't paid your HOA fees this month," she snapped, her voice dripping with superiority. "Everyone is expected to contribute. Don't think you're an exception." At first, I thought she was joking. I actually laughed out loud. "Karen," I said, "I'm not part of your HOA. I don't owe you a dime." Her face turned red instantly, but she didn't back down. She wagged her finger like a teacher scolding a child. "That's not how this works. If you live in this neighborhood, you follow the rules. And the rules say you pay fees to me." That last part hit me like a ton of bricks. To her, she wasn't even collecting for the HOA. She was pocketing the money. My stomach turned at the realization. She wasn't just being bossy. She was running some kind of scam. I leaned back in my chair, calm but firm. "Karen, I suggest you walk away before you embarrass yourself even more." But Karen didn't walk away. She doubled down, insisting she had legal authority and threatening to fine me, tow my car, and even lien my property. That's when I decided if she wanted a battle, she was going to get one. But this time, she had no idea what kind of fight she'd started or how unprepared she really was for the comeback I had in store. I didn't sleep well that night, not because I was intimidated. Far from it. It was because Karen's outrageous behavior had me wondering how many of my neighbors she'd already shaken down. If she was bold enough to show up on my porch demanding money, she was probably running her little scheme all over the block. The next morning, I decided to do some digging. I walked over to my neighbor, Tom, an older guy who'd lived here for over 20 years. Tom was one of those people who knew everything about the neighborhood, the history, the gossip, and the battles. When I asked him if Karen had ever tried collecting fees from him, his eyes widened. "You too?" he said, shaking his head. "She's been at this for months. She says it's for community improvements, but no one's ever seen a receipt. No meetings, no records, just her pocketing the cash." That confirmed it. She wasn't just entitled. She was scamming innocent people under the fake authority of her HOA, and worse, some neighbors had actually paid her. I couldn't let that slide. I went back home and pulled out my laptop. A few hours of research told me everything I needed to know. Karen's HOA had zero jurisdiction over my property. Even within her HOA, she couldn't legally demand cash payments without documented fees and approved budgets. And most importantly, impersonating an HOA officer for personal gain was considered fraud. Armed with this information, I started piecing together my plan. If Karen thought she could bully me into handing over money, she was in for a rude awakening. That evening, she returned, clipboard in hand, smug as ever. She walked right up to my porch like she owned it. "Well," she said, "do you have my payment?" I smiled. "Actually, Karen, I've got something better." Her smirk faltered. "Excuse me." "I've been doing a little research," I said, keeping my tone calm but deliberate. "And it turns out, not only do I not owe you a cent, but what you're doing could land you in some serious legal trouble." Her face went pale. She opened her mouth to argue, but for once, she didn't have the right words ready. That's when I knew I had her rattled. And that was only the beginning of my comeback. Because if Karen wanted to play games, I was about to flip the entire board right out from under her. The very next day, Karen tried to regain her footing. She came storming back with her clipboard like it was some kind of weapon. But this time, I wasn't just armed with research. I had a plan. "Listen," she barked before I could even greet her. "If you don't pay up today, I'll have no choice but to escalate this to the HOA board. And trust me, they'll come down harder than I ever would." I leaned casually against my porch railing, unbothered. "Karen, you keep forgetting something important. I'm not part of your HOA, which means your board has as much power over me as a lemonade stand." Her eyes narrowed. "You think you're smart, don't you?" I smirked. "No, I just know the law. And I also know you've been collecting cash from neighbors, without so much as a paper trail. That's not just against the rules, that's fraud. Want me to list the state codes for you?" For the first time, I saw her confidence waver. But true to Karen form, she doubled down. "You don't know what you're talking about. Everyone pays. That's how communities work." I raised an eyebrow. "Funny, because Tom down the street said he handed you $200 last month. And yet, there's no record of where that money went. Care to explain?" Her jaw tightened. She muttered something about beautification projects, but it was clear she was scrambling. That's when I pulled out my phone. "You see, Karen, I've been documenting all of this. Every demand, every threat, every false claim. And if you want to keep pushing me, I'll have no problem turning this over to the authorities." Fraud is a pretty big word, don't you think? Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The mighty HOA queen suddenly had nothing to say. I pressed on, lowering my voice just enough to make her lean in. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop harassing me. You're going to stop collecting fees from neighbors. And if you don't, I'll make sure every single person in this community knows exactly what you've been doing. And I'll let the law take it from there." The silence that followed was golden. She stood there, stunned, completely stripped of her usual arrogance. And then, for the first time since I'd known her, Karen turned and walked away without another word. But I knew it wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to give up that easily. And when she tried to strike back, I was ready, because my next move would leave her speechless for good. For a couple of days, things were quiet. Too quiet. I almost started to believe Karen had taken my warning seriously. But with people like her, silence usually means plotting. And sure enough, the storm came. On Wednesday afternoon, I came home from work to find a bright orange paper taped to my front door. In bold letters, it read, "Final notice, pay immediately, or face legal consequences." At the bottom was Karen's signature, scribbled with the authority of someone who thought she was running a government agency instead of a neighborhood clique. I actually laughed out loud. She'd made her own eviction notice. Not only was it fake, but it was also the exact kind of evidence I needed. The next morning, I started calling around. I spoke to a few more neighbors, and as I suspected, several admitted they'd been paying Karen's fees for months. Some were embarrassed, some were angry, but all of them were relieved when I explained they weren't obligated to give her a dime. That's when I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about stopping her from manipulating the entire neighborhood. That evening, I typed up a detailed report with every incident, dates, threats, that ridiculous fake notice, and even the names of neighbors who were willing to back me up. I organized everything neatly in a folder, ready for what I knew would be the final showdown. And sure enough, Karen came marching back not long after sunset. Her face was twisted in smug confidence as she waved another sheet of paper in the air. "This," she announced, "is your last chance. If you don't pay me tonight, I'll have the sheriff here tomorrow morning." I couldn't help but grin. "Perfect," I said, because I'd love to explain this whole situation to the sheriff myself. Her expression faltered. "What do you mean?" I slowly raised the folder in my hand. "I've documented everything, Karen. Every fake demand, every threat, every false notice. And unless you'd like me to take this straight to law enforcement, and maybe even the HOA board you claim to represent. I suggest you stop while you're ahead." For the second time, Karen was speechless. She stared at the folder like it was a ticking bomb. And that's when I delivered the final blow. The comeback that would end her scheme once and for all. Karen stood frozen in my driveway, her fake notice trembling in her hand. For once, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood had no script. No smug comeback, no finger-wagging lecture. Just silence. I took a step closer, holding the folder between us. "Here's the deal," I said, steady and calm. "You can either walk away from this tonight and never harass me or any of our neighbors again, or I'll make sure this folder lands on the sheriff's desk first. Thing tomorrow morning. And trust me, fraud charges don't look good on anyone's record." Her face flushed crimson. You wouldn't dare?" I smiled. "Oh, I would. And unlike your fake notices, everything in here is real." For the first time, I saw fear flicker in her eyes. The woman who loved to flex power over others was finally realizing she had none left. She stammered something about a misunderstanding, but I cut her off before she could spin another lie. "No, Karen, it's not a misunderstanding. It's a scam. And it ends now." The silence stretched until finally, she did something I never expected. She turned on her heel and stormed off without another word. No threats, no demands, just retreat. But I wasn't done. The very next day, I called a neighborhood meeting at Tom's house. I showed everyone the folder, laid out the evidence, and explained how Karen had been pocketing their money for months. The shock on their faces was priceless. Some neighbors were furious, others embarrassed they hadn't questioned her sooner. But one thing was clear. Karen's reign of intimidation was over. Together, we drafted a letter to the real HOA board, attaching all the evidence. Within a week, the board had officially reprimanded Karen and removed her from her self-appointed collections role. She was barred from handling anything involving fees again. The best part? Several neighbors demanded she repay the money she'd scammed out of them. And since the threat of legal trouble was hanging over her head, Karen had no choice but to cough it up. As for me, I got exactly what I wanted. Peace. No more knocks on my door. No more fake notices. Just quiet mornings on my porch with a hot cup of coffee and the satisfaction of knowing I'd shut down her little empire with nothing more than facts and backbone. And that was the real comeback. Not yelling, not fighting, but proving that sometimes the truth is the sharpest weapon you can wield. Karen thought she could intimidate me into submission. Instead, she walked away speechless and exposed.